The distress beacon had been pinging for 6 days before anyone bothered to check it. Ren Aldrich was not anyone's first choice for the job. He was a medic, not a scout. His posting at Outpost Aldrich 7 was supposed to be quiet, patch up frostbite cases, treat radiation rashes from broken suit seals, and stay out of the way of people with actual military rank. But the Outpost's 2 scouts were both down with a stomach virus, and the beacon was not going to check itself. So Ren took the small survey shuttle out alone, flying low over the surface of a frozen world that had no name, only a number in the Conclave's registry. The sky was a pale, dead grey. The ground was black ice and scattered rock. Nothing lived here. Nothing was supposed to. The beacon was coming from a debris field near the northern ridge. Ren almost turned back when he saw what it was, a Vrethkai nest vessel, or what was left of one. The ship had come down hard. The hull was split open like a cracked shell, and ice had already crept inside. Whatever happened here, it had happened fast, and whoever survived had left just as fast. He almost marked it as salvage and left. Then his scanner blinked, one heat signature, faint, dropping. He went in on foot. The inside of the wreck smelled like burnt metal and something older, something animal. Ren moved carefully over the debris, following the scanner's reading deeper into what had been the cargo hold. He found the nest there, a circular structure of woven alloy and dried organic matter, roughly 3 meters across. 7 small shapes lay inside it, still and cold. The 8th was not still, it was shaking. It was the size of a large dog, maybe a little bigger. Its scales were the color of old ash, pale gray with faint blue at the edges. One wing was folded wrong, not broken, but fused partially at the joint, the membrane bunched and warped. It was breathing in shallow, rapid pulls, and its body temperature on the scanner read far below what any living creature should register. Ren stood there for a moment. He knew what this was. Every person in Conclave space knew what Vrethkai were: ancient species, apex predators, biologically armored, telepathic in adulthood, the kind of creature that entire fleets gave way to, and this one clearly had been left. The Vrethkai did not keep the weak. That was not tradition, it was law among their kind. A hatchling that could not keep pace was a liability to the bloodline. The logic was clean. The result was a dying animal in a frozen wreck on a dead world. Ren picked it up. It weighed more than he expected. The scales were rough against his suit. The hatchling made no sound, no struggle. It barely had the energy for that. Ren carried it back to the shuttle and set it down on the emergency medical pad, cranking the heat as high as the unit could manage. He pulled every thermal pack he had and stacked them around the small body. Then he started running diagnostics with hands that he would not admit were shaking. Core temperature critical, hydration near 0. The fused wing joint was not new. It had been that way since before hatching, a developmental issue. That was why it had been left. Too small, wrong wing, bad investment. Ren worked through the flight back. By the time he docked at the outpost, the hatchling's temperature had climbed 2 degrees. Not enough, still not enough. Director Whale was waiting at the dock, which meant someone had been watching the shuttle's feed. Whale was a careful man, a political man, and the look on his face was the look of someone doing very fast math on consequences. "Aldrich," he said, "that is a Vrethkai hatchling." "Yes," Ren said, not stopping. "You cannot bring that inside." "I already did." Whale followed him into the medical bay, listing objections the entire way: diplomatic incident, Vrethkai Elder Council, conclave regulations on non-registered biological transports. Ren listened to all of it and kept his eyes on the scanner. The hatchling's temperature had dropped again. The outpost's heating was better than the shuttle's, but still not enough. He built a containment chamber out of 3 cargo crates, a heat emitter from the equipment bay, and insulation stripping from a spare wall panel. It took 40 minutes. During those 40 minutes, he talked to the hatchling, not because he thought it could hear him, but because silence felt wrong. At the end of the 3rd day, the temperature reading stabilized. At the end of the 4th day, it climbed on its own. On the morning of the 5th day, Ren was sitting on the floor next to the crate, half asleep over a cold cup of something that had been coffee, when he heard a sound. a small, dry rasp. He opened his eyes. The hatchling was looking at him. The eyes were gold, with vertical pupils, and they were very, very focused. Not the unfocused gaze of a sick animal. Something else was in that look, something taking stock, measuring, deciding. Ren had read enough about Vrethkai biology to know what imprinting was. A survival mechanism in hatchlings, a neurological bond to the first mind they connected with. It was meant to be the nest mother. It was not meant to be a human medic sitting on a cold floor in a frontier outpost. The hatchling held his gaze for a long, still moment. Then it made the rasp again, quieter this time, and closed its eyes and went back to sleep. Ren sat there for a while longer. Then he got up, found a pen, and wrote on the top of the crate in plain block letters, Sorvak. He did not know why that name, it simply fit. 3 days later, he filed a medical report with Conclave Central. He described what he had found, what he had done, and the current condition of the patient. He listed the patient's species as Vrethkai and the patient's status as stable. He did not ask for permission. He had not asked because he already knew the answer would have been no. 2 years passed on that frozen outpost, and the galaxy forgot about Sorvak. That was fine. Sorvak was busy. In those 2 years, he grew from the size of a large dog to the size of a cargo hauler. His ash-gray scales darkened at the edges, picking up a deep charcoal color that caught the light differently depending on the angle. The fused wing healed, not perfectly. The left membrane still had a warped kink in it, but it worked. When he first flew inside the outpost's largest hangar bay, he clipped a fuel rack and knocked over 3 crates of medical supplies. He landed, looked at the mess, looked at Ren, and then looked at his own wing with an expression that Ren could only describe as annoyed. "You'll adjust," Ren told him. Sorvak adjusted. That was perhaps the first and most important thing Ren noticed about him. He did not dwell. When something did not work, he found a way to make it work. When a method failed, he quietly tried a different one. He did not complain. He observed, he changed, he moved on. Language came first. Ren had no idea how to teach a Vrethkai anything, so he did what he knew. He talked. Constantly, he narrated his own work. He labeled things. He explained procedures out loud even when no one needed to hear them. Within 3 weeks, Sorvak was matching sounds to objects. Within 6 weeks, he was responding to questions with something close to words, a low resonant sound that sat at the bottom of Ren's hearing range. Within 4 months, Sorvak spoke in complete sentences. By month 7, he was correcting Ren's grammar. "You said him and I went," Sorvak said one evening, watching Ren write up a supply report. "It should be he and I." Ren looked up from his desk. "You've been learning grammar rules. I read the style guide you had in your secondary data drive. Also the 3 linguistics textbooks in the Outpost library. Also the Conclave Standard Dictionary, all of it." Ren stared at him for a moment. "That drive also had my personal messages on it." "Yes," Sorvak said. "Your mother writes to you every 2 weeks and you have not replied in 4 months. You should fix that." The chess incident happened shortly after. Ren had an old physical set, actual carved pieces, a gift from a friend years ago. He taught Sorvak the rules on a quiet afternoon with nothing else to do. Sorvak listened carefully, asked 3 clarifying questions about the movement of the night, and then beat Ren in 11 moves. Ren set up the pieces again, convinced it was a fluke. Sorvak beat him in 9. By the end of the week, Sorvak was playing blindfolded, entirely from memory, while simultaneously running a diagnostic on the outpost's power grid, because Ren had mentioned the secondary relay was making an odd sound. "Knight to F6, Sorvak said, and then, "Your relay coupling is loose. The vibration signature suggests another 3 weeks before it fails. I would replace it now." Ren replaced it the next day. It would have failed in 18 days. The real shift happened when Ren gave Sorvak access to the history archives. It started as a simple thing. Ren was explaining why humans built the way they did, why their outpost designs were different from Dorkai or Vrethkai construction, and he pulled up a historical reference to show the context. Sorvak's eyes went to the archive index and stayed there. He read for 6 days without sleeping. Vrethkai did not need as much sleep as humans. He went through human history in order: the early wars, the famines, the periods of collapse, the slow, ugly recoveries, the moments of strange, unexpected beauty scattered between the disasters. He read about plagues and how humans ran toward them to help the sick. He read about floods and how humans formed chains in the water to pull strangers out. He read about wars that ended and what humans built in the rubble afterward. On the 7th day, he went quiet, a full day of silence, which was unusual for him. On the 8th day, he came to Ren with a question. "Your species has been destroyed many times," he said. "Cities, civilizations, whole populations, and every time what remained rebuilt. Why?" Ren thought about it. "I don't know if there's one answer." "There is a pattern," Sorvak said. "In every account, in every period, someone chose not to leave, someone stayed. That is the pattern. The ones who stayed are why anything survived." Ren did not say anything for a moment. Then, "Yeah, that sounds right." Sorvak was quiet again for a few seconds. "I understand now why you came back into the wreck," he said. It was the first time he had ever mentioned it directly. "You are a member of a species that stays." A conclave xenobiology team arrived 4 months later, 5 researchers sent to assess the situation and file a developmental report. They expected an animal. They brought behavioral assessment tools, reflex testing equipment, and a set of standardized cognitive baseline tests designed for Vrethkai at various life stages. Sorvak met them in the hangar bay and greeted them in fluent Dorkai. Then, while they were still adjusting to that, he told them in calm and precise terms that he had already reviewed their published papers on Vrethkai adolescent cognition, found 3 methodological errors in the most recent one, and would be happy to discuss his observations if they were interested. They were interested. They were also deeply uncomfortable, which Sorvak found mildly entertaining. When they left 2 weeks later, their report classified Sorvak as a developmental anomaly requiring continued observation. Ren filed his own note at the bottom of the report. "He's fine, leave him alone." The response from the Vrethkai Elder Council arrived 11 days after that. It was brief. It said that the hatchling known in their records as Clutch 7 Runt had been legally abandoned and was no longer a Vrethkai concern. It also said they were watching. Ren read the message twice and then handed his tablet to Sorvak, who read it once and set it down without expression. After a moment, he said, "They named me Clutch 7 Runt." "Yes. You named me Sorvak." "Yes." Sorvak considered this. "Yours is better," he said, and went back to the book he was reading. Nobody prepared Ren for what Conclave Central actually looked like. He had seen images, of course. Everyone had. But images did not carry the weight of it, the sheer compressed mass of a station built to hold representatives from 47 species, designed to make everyone feel equally small. The ceilings were tall enough for Vrethkai adults. The corridors were wide enough for Dorkai heavy transport rigs. Everything was deliberate, and all of it said the same thing: "This place is bigger than you." Sorvak walked through the main concourse without breaking stride. He was 4 years old, not yet at full Vrethkai size, but close enough to draw stares from every direction. His ash-gray and charcoal scales caught the station's overhead lights. His posture was unhurried. He was reading a display screen bolted to the far wall, a legal filing index, while walking, which should have been impossible and was simply something he did. Ren walked beside him and tried to look like someone who had a plan. The hearing had been called to resolve a formal custody dispute. The Vrethkai Elder Council, represented by Ambassador Thurath, was claiming Sorvak under Vrethkai biological rights law. Their argument was straightforward. He was Vrethkai, he had been found in a Vrethkai vessel, and regardless of his abandonment status, his existence was a Vrethkai matter. Director Whale had filed a counterclaim on behalf of Outpost Aldrich 7, citing Conclave Charter Article 7, which protected sapient beings from involuntary transfer. The argument was also straightforward and considerably less supported by precedent. Ambassador Thurath was already inside when they arrived. He was old, ancient, by Vrethkai measure, his scales a deep faded bronze, his eyes the pale gold of something that had seen centuries go by. He was massive in the way that Sorvak was not yet, but would be. He looked at Sorvak the way a person looks at a math problem they are confident they can solve. Sorvak looked back without expression. The first day was legal arguments. Representatives from both sides presented their cases to a panel of 7 conclave adjudicators. Ren sat in the gallery and listened to his translator earpiece and tried to follow the procedural layers. Whale sat beside him, looking like he had not slept in a week, because he had not. Thurath spoke for 2 hours. His conclave standard was precise and formal. He cited 80 years of Vrethkai legal precedent. He spoke about bloodline integrity, species sovereignty, and the right of the Vrethkai people to manage their own biological future. He did not once refer to Sorvak by name. He called him the entity in question each time. Whale's legal representative spoke for 40 minutes and made 3 solid arguments. The adjudicators asked careful, neutral questions. Nothing was resolved on day 1. On the second day, a new complication arrived. Fleet Admiral Sova Ren entered the hearing chamber and filed an emergency supplemental brief claiming conclave military interest in Sorvak's case. She was tall for a Dorkai, her exoskeleton polished to a high sheen, her rank insignia precise and prominent. She did not speak to Ren. She looked at Sorvak the way Thurath had, but where Thurath saw a problem, Ren saw a resource. She requested a private meeting with Ren that evening. Ren went because refusing an admiral's request was technically possible but practically complicated. "He is extraordinary," Ren said, without any introduction. "You understand that whatever he is now, he will be significantly more in 2 years. In 5 years, there is no military parallel." "He's not a military asset," Ren said. "He will be classified as one regardless of what you prefer," Ren said. "I am offering you the version where you have some say in the process." "I'll pass," Ren said. Ren studied him the way people study things they expect to change their mind about later. "You are a medic," she said. "This is larger than your outpost, Aldrich." "Probably," Ren agreed and left. On the third day, the adjudicators opened the floor for final statements. Whale's representative rose to speak. Thurath's team rose to speak. And then, before either of them could begin, Sorvak stood. He was not supposed to speak. He had not been entered as a presenting party. There were procedures. Sorvak did not sit back down. He looked at the adjudicators and said, in clear and formal conclave standard, "I would like to address the panel." The lead adjudicator, after a very long pause, said, "You may proceed." What followed lasted 11 minutes. Ren kept count. Sorvak spoke calmly. He cited Vrethkai oral law, specifically the passage that stated a Vrethkai who survives abandonment has severed all prior obligations to the clutch. He cited Conclave Charter Article 7. He cited 3 prior cases involving non-standard sapient development and the legal personhood questions they had raised. He noted that no one in the chamber had asked him a single question and that both parties were arguing over him as if he were a piece of cargo. Then he said, "I was left on a frozen world to die because I was too small and my wing did not form correctly. A human came back into a wreck that had no survivors and found me because a scanner said there was still heat. That human gave me a name and a bed and 2 years of books and did not once ask what I was going to be worth. I know what I am Sorvak. I am not Clutch 7 Runt and I am not a Conclave security asset. I am asking this panel to recognize that distinction." The chamber was silent. Thurath was still. Whatever he had prepared to say did not seem to fit anymore. The adjudicators called a recess. The case was tabled pending further review. In the corridor afterward, Thurath passed them without stopping, but he slowed for just one moment beside Sorvak, and he said something in the old Vrethkai tongue, low, guttural, a language that required years of study to understand. Sorvak answered him in the same language, without missing a beat. Thurath walked away. He did not look back, but something in how he moved had shifted, very slightly, in a way that Ren did not have the vocabulary to name. "What did he say?" Ren asked. Sorvak was quiet for a moment. He asked where I learned the old tongue. I told him I read it. He said that was not possible for someone my age. Sorvak paused. I told him I am not what is possible for my age. I am what I became. Ren nodded slowly. Fair answer. He did not disagree, Sorvak said, and they walked on. Word traveled fast in the conclave, and what spread fastest was the kind of story that did not have a clean ending yet. Frontier station personnel talked. Xenobiologists filed reports that other researchers read. The hearing at Conclave Central had not been classified, which meant the transcript was public, which meant anyone who wanted to find an 11-minute speech by a 4-year-old Vrethkai who cited legal code in 3 languages could find it in about 30 seconds. Most species in the conclave filed it under unusual and moved on. Humans, characteristically, sent Ren 47 personal messages calling Sorvak remarkable. Sorvak read them all, said humans are excitable, and went back to the astronomy database he had been studying for the past week. Admiral Ren did not file it under unusual. She filed it under asset and waited. She did not have to wait long. The Moriv changed her timeline for her. The Moriv were not members of the conclave. They were silicon-based, hive-mind in structure, and had no interest in diplomacy because they had no framework for it. Their entire cognitive model was built around expansion and absorption. They had been classified as a peripheral threat for decades, meaning they raided outer colonies occasionally, and the conclave responded slowly, and the affected settlements rebuilt, and no one in the inner systems lost sleep over it. Then 3 human settlements and 2 Dorkai outposts went dark in the same month. The conclave moved into political discussion mode, which meant meetings and filings and procedural reviews that would produce a military response in roughly 6 to 8 weeks. The settlements that had gone dark did not have 6 to 8 weeks. Ren arrived at Ren's new posting, a larger station on the actual frontier, with a full escort and a conclave emergency decree sealed with the High Council's mark. The decree conscripted Sorvak as a temporary conclave military asset under Article 12 of the Interspecies Emergency Cooperation Act. It was legally binding. It had been crafted specifically to be legally binding. Ren had done her work carefully. Ren read the decree. He looked at Ren. He looked at the escort, 12 soldiers in full gear, standing in the docking bay with the particular stillness of people who expected resistance. Then Sorvak stepped forward from behind him, where he had been standing quietly the entire time, and said, "I will go." Ren's expression did not change, but something in her posture relaxed. "Under one condition," Sorvak continued. "Ren Aldrich accompanies me as my designated medical officer, non-negotiable. He holds authority over my medical decisions. No exceptions." Ren calculated for about 2 seconds. "Agreed," she said. She probably expected Sorvak to follow her tactical team's plans. He did not. When the mission briefing was laid out, a direct strike at known Moriv fleet positions, Sorvak listened to the whole thing without interrupting. Then he said, "No." The briefing room went quiet. "This approach destroys the fleet's forward units," Sorvak said. "The coordination node is here." He pointed to a position on the star map that the tactical team had not marked. "It is not on your map because your scout data is 11 days old. In 11 days, a Moriv coordination node moves an average of 3 grid units toward whatever it is managing. Adjusting for their expansion pattern, it is here. You destroy that, the fleet fragments. Fragmented units without a coordination signal retreat and regroup. You lose no ships. The colonies have time." The lead tactical officer stared at the map. "How do you know their movement pattern?" "I read the historical raid data going back 40 years, Sorvak said. "All of it. The pattern is consistent. No one had compiled it in one place before, so no one had seen it." Ren looked at the map for a long moment. "We do it his way," she said. They did it his way. Sorvak flew without a ship. He did not need one. His Vrethkai biology full-spectrum sensory range, the ability to enter a low metabolic state that let him survive brief exposure to vacuum, meant that in the right conditions, He was faster and quieter than any scout craft the Conclave fleet had. He went ahead, moved through the dark between the stars in a way that nothing on the Moriv's sensors was calibrated to detect, and found the coordination node exactly where he said it would be. Then he hit it. Not with fire, not with brute force. He targeted the node's power coupling, a single structural point he had identified from the historical data as a consistent weak spot in Moriv construction. One precise strike, the right angle, and the node's entire relay system collapsed inward. The Moriv fleet fragmented. Without coordination signals, units that had been advancing on colony positions stopped, circled, pulled back. The Conclave fleet arrived to scattered resistance and was able to drive them off in hours instead of days. No Conclave ships were lost. Afterward, in the medical bay of the fleet flagship, Ren worked on Sorvak's injuries. The burns along his left flank were significant. He had taken a direct hit from one of the node's defense systems during the strike. Ren cleaned and treated them with the focused quiet he always brought to medical work, and Sorvak lay still and let him, which was a kind of trust that had no words attached to it. "You did the same thing with the wing," Ren said, not looking up from his work. "What do you mean?" Sorvak asked. "When your wing didn't heal right, you didn't try to fly like the injury wasn't there. You studied how it flew differently and built a new technique around it. You did the same thing tonight. You didn't fight their fleet the way anyone expected. You found the one point that changed everything and hit that instead." Sorvak was quiet for a moment. "You taught me that," he said. Ren looked up. "I didn't teach you combat strategy." "No," Sorvak said. "You taught me to look at what is actually there, not what I expect to be there. Every time something went wrong, that is what you did. You adapted. I paid attention." Ren looked at him for a long moment, then went back to the burns. He did not say anything. There was not much to say. The Conclave's battle report went out across all channels 3 days later. Ren filed a supplemental addendum classifying Sorvak as a Conclave military asset of strategic value. She also filed a proposal for formal conscription protocols. Thurath, somewhere in the inner systems, read the same report and filed a counterclaim. He cited elder-class warrior status under Vrethkai law. He argued Sorvak now met every biological and cognitive threshold for the rank. Under Vrethkai law, that meant he fell under Vrethkai command authority. Both filings landed on the High Council's desk simultaneously. Sorvak read both of them on Ren's tablet the next morning. He handed the tablet back without expression. Then he went to the small unit kitchen in their assigned quarters and carefully, methodically, he had been practicing, made 2 cups of coffee. He set one in front of Ren. "They are doing it again," he said. "Yeah," Ren said. "We should prepare a response." "Yeah," Ren said, and picked up his coffee. Outside, the stars did not care. But somewhere in the political engine of the Conclave, something was about to have to change, because what had been left on an ice world 4 years ago was not going to fit inside anyone's box anymore. There is a particular kind of silence that happens when a very large thing walks into a room and everyone in the room realizes, at the same moment, that none of their plans accounted for how large it actually was. That was the silence in the Conclave High Council chamber on the 3rd day of the hearing when Sorvak stood up. He was 7 years old, which meant nothing in human terms and everything in Vrethkai terms. He had hit his final growth phase during the months since the Moriv campaign. And something in his biology had decided, perhaps compensating for the small and cold start, perhaps simply because that was what he was meant to be, to grow past it. He was now larger than Ambassador Thurath. He was the largest living Vrethkai on record. The chamber had been designed for Vrethkai. He still nearly touched the ceiling. The first 2 days had been what Ren expected. Long, careful political arguments conducted entirely over Sorvak's head while Sorvak sat and listened. Ren's legal team was precise and aggressive. They cited precedent, security necessity, conclave charter law, interspecies cooperation statutes. Their core argument was simple. Sorvak's existence was a military matter, and military matters belonged to the conclave command structure. Thurath's team was different. They were not aggressive. They were patient in the way that something very old is patient. They laid their arguments down like they had all the time in the universe. Elder class warrior designation, Vrethkai sovereign law, bloodline reclassification under the survival clause. Their argument was also simple. What had survived abandonment and grown to elder class status was, by ancient Vrethkai law, a free Vrethkai, and free Vrethkai owed their allegiance to the Elder Council. Neither team asked Sorvak a single question. On the morning of the third day, Ren arrived at the chamber early. Sorvak was already there, sitting with his eyes closed. Not sleeping, Ren knew his sleeping posture. He was thinking. "You know what you are going to say?" Ren asked. "Yes," Sorvak said. "Is it going to cause a problem?" "Probably," Sorvak said, "but it will be the correct problem." The session opened. Both teams moved to begin their final arguments. Sorvak raised one forearm, a gesture, precise and deliberate, and said, "I will speak first." The lead adjudicator, who had dealt with him before, simply said, "You have the floor." What Sorvak said in the next 14 minutes was later transcribed, archived, translated into 31 languages, and taught in 3 different political philosophy curricula across the conclave. Ren listened to all of it and tried not to show on his face what he was feeling, which was something between awe and the particular pride of a person who has watched something grow from a shaking animal in a cargo crate into whatever this was. Sorvak took apart the conclave's claim first. He cited Article 7, Section 4, the same one Wales' team had used years ago, but applied it with surgical precision. The conclave could not claim military authority over a sapient individual who had not enlisted and had not committed an act triggering compulsory service. The emergency decree that had compelled his participation in the Moriv campaign had been a single-incident provision, not a permanent reclassification. He cited the specific legal text. He cited the adjudication that had defined single incident in this context. He cited the counter-precedent Ren's team would likely use and explained why it did not apply. Then he turned to Thurath's claim. He cited Vrethkai oral law in the original Old Tongue, which he had memorized in full. He found the exact passage about elder class status and read the full context, which Thurath's team had quoted selectively. The full context said that a Vrethkai who achieved elder class through survival of abandonment was free and sovereign, not free and therefore owing allegiance to the council. Free. The word in the Old Tongue had no secondary meaning. Then he offered his compromise. The legal category he cited was obscure. It had been written into the Conclave Charter 60 years ago to cover a theoretical situation involving a self-governing machine intelligence, and it had never been used. Independent sovereign entity under Conclave Charter. A recognized individual, not a citizen of any species state, not subject to any command structure, but operating within the law. Able to cooperate, not able to be commanded. "I am not a weapon," Sorvak said at the end. "I am not a cultural reclamation project. I did not survive a frozen world and 6 years of books, and one human who would not give up so that I could become property with better paperwork. I am offering a legal resolution that is fair, that is grounded in existing law, and that allows me to continue to be useful to the conclave and to my species on terms I choose. If that is not acceptable, then I will tell you plainly. I have read every enforcement mechanism available to this body, and I am confident that none of them will work." He said the last sentence without any heat. It was a statement of fact, not a threat. That was what made it land. The chamber was very quiet. Thurath spoke. He said 4 words, "I support the proposal." His own team looked at him. Ren's team looked at him. The adjudicators looked at him. He did not explain himself, and no one asked immediately. Later, when a reporter did ask, Thurath said, "He argued Vrethkai law better than any living elder. The law says what it says. Arguing against it would embarrass us." He paused. "Also, the runt became something we have no word for. When that happens, the honorable response is to acknowledge it." Ren voted against. She was the only council member who did. The motion passed. In a corridor afterward, when the crowds had thinned, Sorvak walked beside Ren in silence for a while. Then I want to go home, he said. Ren looked up at him. Where's home? Sorvak did not hesitate. Wherever you are, he said, obviously. Ren was quiet for a moment, then he nodded and they kept walking. Behind them, in the chamber, the conclave was already dealing with the paperwork. Somewhere in the political infrastructure of 47 species, a small legal category that had never been used now had one resident, a dragon who had been left to die on a nameless ice world and had grown, instead, into something the galaxy did not have a precedent for. The paperwork, Sorvak had noted, was going to take weeks. He had offered to help draft it. They had politely declined. He had not been surprised. The Moriv did not negotiate. That was the thing people kept forgetting until they couldn't anymore. First campaign had stopped a raiding fleet. This was different. The emergency channel data that came in over 4 days painted a picture that the Conclave High Council spent 2 of those days trying to reframe as something less severe, because the accurate framing was very bad. The Moriv Grand Fleet was not raiding. It was colonizing. It had the numbers to absorb 12 inhabited systems, and at current Conclave mobilization speed, 3 of those systems would fall before a single warship reached them. The political machinery did what political machinery does. It convened, it debated, it scheduled follow-up sessions. Sorvak read the full data packet in about 40 minutes, while Ren was still on his second page of the summary briefing. When Ren looked up, Sorvak was already at the navigation terminal, pulling star charts. You have a plan, Ren said. It was not a question. The 3 systems that will fall first are here, here, and here, Sorvak said, pointing. The Moriv advance is coordinated across 5 fleet groups. 4 of them are pushing forward. The 5th is holding back, that is the command group. They learned from before. They moved the coordination node inside the command fleet this time. It is not exposed. He paused. But the 4 advanced groups still need to receive signal from it. That signal has a lag. There is a gap, 12 seconds, in which each advanced group's units make local decisions without central input. If you disrupt their advance at the right moment, during that gap, each group fragments independently, without central correction, fragmentation compounds. The entire advance collapses. Ren looked at the charts. You need to be in 5 places at the same time. Not exactly, Sorvak said. I need to be fast enough that I might as well be. They did not wait for conclave authorization. Sorvak filed a notification, not a request, and they left before anyone with authority to object had finished reading it. What followed was 4 weeks of the kind of work that does not look impressive in reports, because reports can only record outcomes, not the specific quality of exhaustion required to produce them. Sorvak ran a campaign through 4 active war zones with no support fleet and no resupply, relying on speed and the 12-second gap, and a tactical flexibility that no Moriv algorithm had ever needed to account for, because nothing had ever moved like this before. He was shot down on the 8th day. A Moriv interdiction beam, a technology that the Conclave's intelligence files had noted as theoretical. It was not theoretical. Ren spent 19 hours in a field medical shelter on an asteroid doing what he had done on a much smaller scale 7 years ago on a frozen world, keeping something alive that had decided it was going to stay alive regardless. Sorvak woke up and immediately asked for the current status of the 3rd Advance Fleet. Ren told him to be quiet for 30 minutes. Sorvak was quiet for 22 minutes and then asked again. He was shot down a second time on the 21st day. This time the burns went deep into the connective tissue under the left flank scales, the same side as the old Moriv burns from the first campaign, the same side as the fused wing that had never fully straightened. Ren worked through the night without stopping, because stopping was not a category that existed in the kind of work he did. And when the light on the asteroid's surface shifted from dark to a pale gray that was close enough to morning, he was still going. Sorvak was half-conscious, which meant he was aware enough to talk. "You are still doing this," he said. His voice was lower than usual, rough from pain. "Yeah," Ren said, not looking up. 7 years, Sorvak said. 7 years, Ren agreed. You never asked what I would become. None of my business, Ren said. I'm a medic. My job was keeping you alive. What you did with alive was yours. Sorvak was quiet for a long time. Then, I think I chose correctly. What did you choose? Ren asked. Everything, Sorvak said, and went back to sleep. On the 28th day, Sorvak hit the command fleet. He did not destroy it. He did not have to. He dismantled its coordination infrastructure from the inside, 3 precise strikes, timed to the 12-second gap, hitting the relay architecture that the node depended on to reach the advance groups. Without relays, the node's signal could not travel. The advance groups fragmented. The Conclave fleet, which had been driving hard for 26 days to reach position, arrived to a disorganized enemy with no coordination and drove them out of all 12 systems in 11 hours. No systems fell. After Ren sat in the medical bay of the fleet flagship and looked very tired, Sorvak lay with his eyes closed, burns treated, breathing even. The sounds of a working ship moved around them, crew and systems, and the small normal weight of a crisis ending. A young Vrethkai officer, part of Thurath's formal delegation, sent to observe, found Ren in the corridor outside, and stood there for a moment in the particular way of someone who has prepared a question and is now uncertain how to ask it. How did you do it? He asked finally. How did you make him what he is? Ren thought about a cargo crate with a name written on it in block letters. He thought about chess and grammar corrections and 6 days of silence after reading human history. He thought about a fused wing and a new way of flying. I didn't do anything, he said. I didn't want him to die, that was all. He did everything else. The young Vrethkai was quiet. Then, perhaps we have been measuring the wrong things. Ren did not answer that. He went back into the medical bay and sat down. The months after were loud with politics. The conclave processed Sorvak's formal status paperwork, which took longer than anyone expected because no one had done it before. 3 advisory councils offered him seats. He declined all 3. He was offered territory under conclave settler rights, a formal Vrethkai ancestral name, and a military commendation with full honors ceremony. He took the name. He declined everything else. He and Ren were assigned to a new frontier posting, larger, louder, better stocked. Sorvak barely fit in the common areas, but had developed an efficient system for moving through corridors that only occasionally resulted in minor structural damage. One evening, Ren was cooking, real food, human food, in a kitchen unit that required Sorvak to position himself extremely carefully around the doorframe. Sorvak watched him from the corridor, head tilted at the angle that meant he was about to say something he had been sitting with for a while. I looked up the medical logs, Sorvak said, from the first night on the ice world. Ren kept stirring. Yeah. Your hands were shaking, Sorvak said. In the documentation, the scanner notes registered microtremor. You were scared. Probably, Ren said. But you kept going. You were alive, Ren said. That was enough reason. Sorvak was quiet for a while. Outside, through the station's viewport, the stars did their old, indifferent work of burning. Good, Sorvak said finally, and settled his enormous head on his forelimbs and closed his eyes. It was enough.